Hello, thank you for coming to my live. I am Teacher Kelly Tag, and thanks so much for coming, Kathy. All right, so if you saw my last video, I went on a lot of interviews the past 2 months, and most of them were within like a 3-week period. So I know a thing or two about interviewing. I ended up watching a lot of YouTube videos about questions to ask and how to answer them and things like that. I will link that video at the end and in the description. Hello, Rebecca. Thanks for coming. Okay, so this is according to board teachers. Now, I'm going to let you know if I encountered this question when I was interviewing, and if I answered it the way that board teachers says to answer it and how I answered it. But I thought that they would be a really good resource to start with. And then as I'm sharing screen, I will tell you coming soon, I also am going to interview my cousin and her husband who happen to be an admin, because I figured they do hiring and they will know exactly what kinds of questions they're looking for. And, but anyways, they didn't want to be on camera. Not everybody does. So I'm just going to ask them and relay the information to you. So anyways, teaching interview questions to prepare for. Tell us about yourself. So they are saying you don't have to reveal personal information. They just want to know for the hiring committee to assess your communication skills. So with this, I would just tell them specifically about my teaching experience. Sometimes instead of tell us about yourself, they would ask, tell us about your teaching experience or your experience in education. But I figure any job who's asking this, they don't want to know your personal life. They really want to know, tell us about yourself in regards to this job. Same thing when you saw in my video, I was also applying to like video jobs. I would tell them my experience in video. So that's what I did with this one. And you guys can tell me if you've done interviews, if you agree with me, disagree with me, or if you would have given a different answer. Curious to know. We can all learn from each other. What are some of your most successful classroom management techniques? All right, I struggled with this one. I did not know how to answer this one. But let's see what board teachers says. Keep it simple. Talk about things like using equity sticks, establishing consistent routines, or creating a class contract. You don't have to prove you've mastered all aspects of student behavior, only that you use thoughtful techniques. So for this, it depended on the age that I was interviewing for of how I answered this. I think, let's see, what were some of the things I did? If it was like younger elementary, I would maybe say something about a chart or stickers or incentives. I would also talk about establishing routines like they were talking about. But, different ages for this required different answers. How do you handle difficult students? Oh boy, this is a tough one. All right, so the first thing that board teacher says is be familiar with the school's disciplinary procedure and discuss how you would look into your classroom. All right, so that's actually something that I did. I would always say, well, I would defer to, your school procedures and how you do things. And after that, and then I would proceed to tell them a little bit about my last school's procedures and how we were supposed to do it and what we were supposed to do as far as that goes. Like our old one was give a warning, give a think sheet, call the parents, and then there was like progressions, give lunch detention, things like that. Oh yeah, and it says talk about building positive relationships with students as a way of dealing with and minimizing behavior. I would definitely talk about that too, and I did. How would you deal with a difficult or demanding parent? So another way that I was also asked this question would be, how do you communicate with parents? Sometimes they were asking more in a general sense, how do you communicate with parents? And this is specifically a difficult, demanding parent. So here's what board teacher says. Talk about strategies you have for keeping conversations with parents professional and amiable while still making your point. Make sure to mention documentation, because when it comes to difficult parents, you definitely want to keep a paper trail. Okay, so that's good advice, I think. So if they asked a more general, broad, question of how do you communicate with parents, I would talk about how, I use email first and then phone calls, or that I would have some type of something on the web or something that I sent home to the kids, depending on the age of what I said, communicating with parents of what we're doing in class, and also a class website where you're just letting them know what's going on in class, and which I did at my last school. So you could kind of talk in more a general sense if they're just asking in general how you communicate with parents. And also, one thing my old school really encouraged is that also you call the parents when the child's doing something really well as the bad ones. Or for every, bad call you had to make, you also made a good call. Just for time's sake, I tended to do that through email, like email the parents, oh, your child's doing really great, blah, 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 blah. So that's how I kind of answered that. If I walked into your classroom on a typical day, what would I see going on? Ooh, this is a good one. All right, so board teacher says, as if there's such thing as a typical day. Talk about your routine, the type of bell ringers you use, how you introduce a new lesson, how you monitor independent group work, and how you assess learning. When answering this question, it's a good idea to throw in a few typical buzzwords. Okay, that's pretty much what I did when I answered these. Of course, it depended on the age, and sometimes it would ask, about your previous school. So then I would try to tell them something. But yes, let them know about the routines, about the children learning and things like that. And one thing that board teachers doesn't have in this list, but they always ask at the end of your interviews, they always ask, do you have any questions for me? I'm going to stop share for a minute. And I got this one off the internet and also shared this in my last video, but I always would say, what would you expect from me to see in my classroom if you walked in my classroom? And that was also a way where you could really get to know the personality of the school and get to know if you think the personality of the school aligns with you and your personality. And you saw how many job interviews I went on, so I could be picky when it comes to that, but maybe if job interviews are more scarce where you are, you can't be as picky, but that was eye-opening too. All right, so I wanted to also see what you guys are saying as I'm going along. Good question, classroom management. That was always my weakest area. Yeah, not gonna lie, I had trouble with that one too, especially being middle school and coming in the middle of the year. That was really hard. These are great questions. Yes, I think so too. All right, here, back to it. And then comment as we go along, and every once in a while, I'll stop sharing and see what you guys are saying. Because the wonderful thing about live streams is this can be a two-way conversation, a two-way street. What do you look for in a colleague? Okay, I definitely got questions like this or similar questions. Similar questions might be something like, what do you think about working on a team? Or would you like working with a team? Or what does a team look like to you? What's your ideal team? Those were kind of similar questions that I would get as I was interviewing. Board teacher says, this can be a tricky one because what admin wants to know is if you will be a team player and positive addition to the faculty. But what the other teachers on the committee want to know is if you'll be a fun teacher friend. So try to sound positive and professional, but at the same time, like you're totally down with cracking jokes during a faculty meeting. And as far as interview goes, sometimes you would be interviewed by one person, like just the principal, or two people, the principal, the vice principal, the head of that department, the other teacher in that grade. So there are times it would be a big group and you would have colleagues and the principal, but other times just the principal. So actually with this one, this was kind of easy for me to answer because I could draw on my last school, my last experience. I had a really wonderful co-teacher who was a great mentor to me, who just took me under her wings the second I came in and was really easy to work with. So I think I would talk about that. I would talk about how we worked well together. We had a great relationship. and that I like working with a team because 2 or more heads are better than 1. And actually, I truly mean that. I really do. Every once in a while, you'll work with someone who doesn't like to be a team player, doesn't like your input, and then it's not fun to work with someone else. But when you get someone who's great to work with, then it is great to work with other people. You help them, they help you. And in general, I find out that the type of person who wants to go into teaching, kind of has a giving personality. There's always exceptions, of course. But what do you guys find in that area? All right. How have you used data and/or research to inform your teaching? Board teachers said you could show your commitment to research by explaining that you'll be bringing back nap time, offering more resets, and providing lots of time for independent reading, but that probably isn't the answer that will land you the job. I was thinking, yeah, what if the principals don't agree with those statements? So still, it is crucial you spend hours poring over data to answer the question. Talk about how data informally with things like exit tickets or formative assessments. I kind of did that with the assessments, but in my last school, we had these PLC meetings where every week we would discuss, how did this assignment work? Did it meet the criteria? How could we do it better next year? And it'd be with my co-teacher and another person. I'm forgetting her job title, but anyways, her job was to, make sure all the standards were being implemented and everything. And she was in every meeting. So this one was actually easy for me to answer because I just drew on that in our PLC meetings and how we did it. And then I did talk about some of like my formative assessments and things like that. Let's see, are you guys saying anything before okay, let me stop share and see what you're saying. Like I said, in live streams, this is supposed to be a two-way conversation. Okay, so I like your question to them about their expectations when they walk into your classroom. Yes. I got that off the internet and thought that's a good one. I wish I could remember who even gave me that advice because I watched a million videos about, interview question and answers. Teams, it would be nice to know what your responsibilities would be on that team. What did the previous teacher do with that team? Example, team of some grade level. Okay, that's really good. That's something you could use also as at the end. Do you have any questions for me? Or just go ahead and ask it while you're trying to answer that question. That's a good one. Like, what do they expect from teams? Because every school, it's different. In some schools, you were working with like a team of 3 or 4 other people who were also in that same grade. Or if it was in the ESL position, sometimes you're working, with several different teachers. All right, so that's a good one. Okay, here, back to what board teachers is saying about. Bear with me. Sometimes it takes a second to share. Okay. 8, how do you feel about evaluations? What do you consider a successful evaluation? I don't think I was ever asked this one. Let's see what board teachers have to say. Again, honesty is a good policy. No one loves being evaluated, but it's okay to admit that, especially if there are other teachers on the hiring committee who probably also don't love to be evaluated. Just be sure to point out you recognize the value of the process and try to share about a time when you did receive helpful or encouraging feedback. Okay. I think board teachers' answer is really good because, and I actually agree with their answer legitimately. Like, no one, of course, likes it, but it always helps you improve. And there's nothing wrong with improving. And as teachers, don't we always just believe that, you should always be learning? So I think that's a good answer that they said. And actually, I didn't get evaluated at all this past year at my new school, but I did when I worked for the private school. So how will you approach blank grade subject differently than blank grade subject? Okay, good question, because I was teaching middle school and I was applying for jobs that are elementary and preschool. Did I get this? I'm not sure. I think I got similar questions, maybe not exactly worded like this, but this is a good one. So board teacher says, if you have the opportunity, talk to a teacher who teaches in the grade or subject you are applying for, so you have a good handle on the differences between third graders and sixth graders, or between what's expected in a science classroom versus social studies. Okay, you guys saw my video. Some days I was literally running from job interview to job interview, and lots of times they'd call and be like, can you interview today? Can you interview tomorrow? So I didn't have time to talk to teachers in each grade, but I definitely have teacher friends who've taught in other grades that I have talked to. So, you know, that's an easy answer to do. What is your greatest strength as a teacher? What is your greatest weakness? Oh boy, this one's always a tough one, not just in teaching jobs, but in any job you apply for, because with strengths, you don't want to sound too cocky, but you want to toot your own horn. It is a job interview. With weaknesses, you need to share something. You're not perfect, obviously, but if you share the wrong thing, that could be held against you. And so I know just in regular job interviews, like saying something like, oh, I'm late all the time is, you know, one of my downfalls. And, you know, there's no way they're going to hire you. And that's actually not something I struggle with. I've worked in live TV where everything has to be on time, but that you get the idea. There are some things you can't say. Anyways, let's see what board teachers have to say. If you are on good terms with your current administrator or supervising teacher, this is an excellent question to ask them in preparation for a teaching interview. And it's not a bad idea to let hiring committee know that you asked this of your last supervisor. It shows you are self-reflective and open to criticism. Okay, I only worked at my last job for 5 months, so I didn't feel like I had that kind of relationship where I could ask or I felt comfortable enough to ask, but that's an idea. I think with greatest weaknesses, I know at least one time I did say classroom management was hard for me, like we talked about earlier, Rebecca. And I did say, you know, I came in the middle of the year and, you know, things like that. So I don't know if that's in the category of something you should never say. So I actually asked my husband after the interview and he said, no, I think it was good. I think it was an honest answer, you know, something you should have said, but at the same time, like, he interviews a lot of people, but not specifically in the teaching realm. So I don't know. But here, I'm going to see what you guys are saying. But also that particular job, I'll tell you in a minute. Let's see. Are these ones I've already read? Yeah, I already read that one. A good evaluation for me is when I do more good than bad, but I know there's always room for improvement. Yes, absolutely. And then you hope if they really are telling you improvement, like it's legit things you need to work on and not just like, oh, I need to say something, so I had to. But anyways, yeah. Like I said, I don't have that much experience with that part. Okay. Why are you passionate about blank? How would I know if I observed your class? So let's see what they're saying. So blank could be several different things. This is actually a really fun question because if you love literature, history, or science, or if you're crazy about working with young children or middle schoolers or teenagers, you will naturally want to talk about it. Still, passion does not always equal eloquence, so be sure you've given this question some thought so you can enthusiastically and clearly articulate. Okay, so I'm guessing might be, why are you passionate about history if you're a history teacher? Why are you passionate about English? So that would be easy to answer if you are applying for a job and you're really passionate. But maybe, so I ended up getting a job in special ed preschool. So a lot of times, like, why are you passionate about special ed? Why are you passionate about preschool? For those kinds of situations, I a little bit drew on my experience. I actually was doing special ed summer school up through last week. And then I'll talk about like way back when I was a kid and my grandmother took me to work with special needs adults. And that was like my first time being exposed to it. I would say something like that. You know, if it's preschool specifically, I'd say how much I like the little kids, which I do actually. Okay. Sorry, ads get in there. A lot of ads on the board teacher site. All right. How do you use technology in your classroom? Is there a technology you'd like to use but haven't had the chance yet? Hello, I come from the online teaching world, so this one was so easy for me. You know, I was able to say that. I was able to say I come from online teaching, so technology is not a problem for me. I'll talk about Nearpod and what else? Nearpod and Google Slides and Canva and in the school system, Canvas and YouTube. There's a lot you can use. Is there a technology you'd like to use but haven't had the chance? I don't think I was asked that one, but if I had to answer that one, I'd say like Pear Deck. I heard it's similar to Nearpod, but I haven't tried it. Oh yeah, and you could also say like Kahoot, Look. Book it. Is it Book It? Would you be willing to be a tough one? Okay. So they said, to be clear, I don't have time to take on extra duties right now. It's a legitimate answer. Yeah, I don't know if I would say that in an interview. Coaching, cheerleading, or sponsoring the key club should not be determining qualifications for a professional educator. That said, if it comes down to 2 well-qualified teachers and only one is willing to take on extra duties, most school will go with the other teachers. This is a tough one because honestly, I don't want to do any of it. I mean, you guys know, because you both have been teachers and anyone watching later, that teaching takes a lot of work outside the classroom. And some of these pay and some don't. But yeah. So actually, here, I'll stop share while I tell this story. And I can also see what you guys are saying. So if you saw my other video, I talked about one of the schools, which ended up being 25 minutes away, but it was in the same county as mine, which means it had my county's pay, or I could go 30 minutes north and make more money. Anyway, so that was kind of one I didn't even want anyway. But one of the first things that they said to me was, we want a teacher who comes to all the extracurricular activities. And I was like, because I'm busy. Like outside of work, my son's in travel soccer. I only have 2 more years till he goes off to college. So I don't want to miss those years. You know, you only have a certain amount of time with your own kids until they're off doing their own thing. So, you know, I don't want to put other people's kids above mine is the short answer. And I always said, like, I will do more of those things once I'm, you know, my own kids are up and out of the house. But I don't think you should be expected to do those things. And my last school didn't expect that. So if they tell me they expect that, I don't know. That makes me think twice about working there, honestly, because like I said, already teaching requires a lot of work outside of the classroom, a lot with like the grading and the planning and things like that. Okay, let's see. Oh, right. Let's see. Hi, Mandy. This is an interesting one. I haven't honestly thought much about technology in the classroom. Well, you're an online teacher, so that'll be an easy one for you to answer. What helped my husband get hired was his interest in teaching an after-school chess club. Okay, all right. That's good, but he legit wanted to teach it. Like, you don't want to tell them that you want that just to get the job, and then when they get you in there, you're like, never mind. That won't look good either. I honestly am not a huge fan of tech in the classroom for learning purposes, but maybe as a way to communicate with parents about it would be great. Okay, you teach preschool too, right? So I almost think, I don't know, I'm about to start teaching preschool, but I almost think, you know, tech in the classrooms, I was teaching middle school and I do feel like it was good just because that's what they do all the time. So you got to kind of meet them where they are. And then coming from the online classroom too, it also made grading easier, honestly. Some schools like tech more than others. We go to a non-tech school right now. Yes, that is true. Where I went to school, all the kids had a Chromebook, which they all have had since COVID, and they did a lot of their assignments on Chromebook. Individual teachers could choose not to use that, and they could, you know, do stuff on paper. But I also found from a teaching perspective that, well, especially middle school, you have 160 students. It might be different if it was like elementary or preschool where you have a lot less. But the grading, I just ended up, the grading of the papers just became impossible. So it was so much easier to grade when they did it, you know, through their Chromebooks. All right, how do you feel about insert whatever education technique the school is focusing on? What would they be focusing on? Okay, let's see what board teachers has to say. If possible, find out what this particular administration feels are best practices and educate yourself on those. Okay, again, hard to kind of find that out ahead of time when you're going from interview to interview to interview and they call you and like, I want to interview you today, you know. It might be a good idea to brush up on a variety of buzzwords just to cover your bases. These could be anything from co-teaching to block scheduling to inquiry-based learning and more. Okay, so my answer is going to be a little different because I think I got similar questions, but my school specifically where I work, they were focusing on reading and writing because the scores were lower after COVID. So even though I taught social studies, you could easily do things that have to do with reading and writing in social studies as well. Actually, we had a huge research paper that they had to do as their big project. All right, sorry for all these ads. Board Teachers has a lot of ads. Describe some successful differentiation strategies that you have used. Okay, Board Teachers says, how have you differentiated for English language learners and students with an IEP? What about gifted students or students with special interests? Have you modified your teaching to meet the needs of various learning styles and preferences? How have you been all of these things to all people and managed to document? Okay. So with English language learners, that was easy because coming from the world with, started with VIP Kids. So I would always bring that in. Like I started teaching online with, teaching English to children in China. And, I had some in my classroom and I was able to say this in several of the interviews that asked, but I still teach one of my students from China. Plus I expanded at OutSchool and independent teaching. I also did some ESL students and Budbee. I was teaching students in South Korea. So I'm able to pull from that and talk about that and, talk about how I know a lot about students who are learning English and students with an IEP. I talked about working with special ed students when I was substitute teaching in summer school while I was also interviewing. I could talk about how I was working with special ed there. Gifted students and special interests. And another thing I would say for this question as well is that if I was applying for like a general ed teacher, like let's say fourth grade teacher or third grade teacher, I would say, well, I would also talk to their ESL teacher, their special ed teacher, their gifted and talented teacher, and ask for suggestions there. And another thing I said for this one is that I would have all different types of assignments and assessment types to reach all the different learning types. So that covers your bases with not only all of these special interest types, but just regular kids in the gen ed class that had different learning styles. So that would be the way that I answered that. And let's see, I looked at my iPad. You guys are answering these. So let's see what you're saying. I like to get your input a little bit here and there as I'm talking. Okay. The hardest thing for me is what books have you read recently? I don't read as much as I should. Oh, okay. You know what? Board Teachers addresses that one. And honestly, that's one that I never got. I never got that one when I was, I didn't get that one. But Board Teachers addresses that. Coming soon. Talk about, here it is. It's the next one. Talk about a professional development book or training that has improved your teaching. If you haven't read a PD book in a while, here are some great options. So this article you can click on and they have some options. Know a great PD book and pursuing growth in your practice, which will really stand out. Actually, Rebecca, since you asked, I'm going to click on this. And after I finish this article, I will come back to it and I'll go over what books would be good. Anyways, for this one, so actually my school, my county sends all new teachers to like a professional development where I went like once a month. So I would just pull on that for me. I mean, if they specifically say a book and they only say a book, then you'd have to think of a book. But professional development, that's easy because, I'm sure you've been to many in training. So if they say professional development or training, I mean, you have a lot of mandatory trainings that you have to do. So you could easily pull on that. Or even how about, depending on the job, but how about we had to do several like TESOLs for VIP Kid. VIP Kid had their own and they had an advanced one. And a lot of people did the one through IOA. You could talk about that. Yes, and I'm trying to think if I don't know, I've read a book. Okay, here we go. Oh, here's a similar question. This one's similar to the last one. And all these ads are getting in the way, of course. Okay. The last book you read. I mean, could be any book. Teacher, this question is likely to come up. Knowing what you read will help fill in the blanks on some questions the hiring committee might not be able to ask. And if you say you're not a reader or that you haven't read a book for pleasure in years, that will also tell them something about you. Yeah, you know what? Read an audiobook like right before you go on all these interviews, and then you can honestly say, I'm reading this right now. So actually, before I interviewed for the history teacher position, I did used to listen to a lot of audiobooks that had to do with historical books. So that one would have been easy for me. I mean, if I had to answer honestly right now, I'm reading YouTube's Secrets. So not sure I'd want to tell them that. But yeah. I mean, if you're an English teacher who loves to read, that's probably an easy one. I have a friend who's an English teacher and she reads books all the time. How do you prepare students for standardized tests? Pro tip, this is probably not a good time to talk about how you really feel about standardized testing. Yeah, don't go, I hate standardized testing, unless of course you love it. Talk about keeping up with essential standards and throwing in a few test-taking strategies. I mean, if you're, applying for a job, like in my count, okay, so in my state, the standardized tests are called SOLs. I would say, I would prepare them for the SOLs by having them practice tests, by going over the material, teaching it, things like that. What are some ways you build relationships with your students? What do you guys think about this one? So I'm having trouble with it loading because there's so many ads. Anyways, what I did say, I talked about some of the strategies I actually did use this past year in my classroom. I did invite a group of students to lunch, or they would ask. Sometimes it got to be too much and I had to say no. I had a group of students who, I invited them to lunch, or then I had a different group of students who would ask. So that's one way, and I'll just try to get to know them. You would answer this. All right, what is your classroom teaching statement? I was never asked this one, and if I was, this is one that would have stumped me. I would have been like, So let's just see what board teachers has to say. A teaching statement is usually a brief essay and is often a requirement for an education degree. Oh, okay. I'm a career switcher, which is why I don't have one. Do you guys have one? But for the purpose of an interview, it should be a succinct personal statement about your educational philosophy and how that philosophy shapes your teaching. What is the purpose of education? Do you have an end goal? What are the best strategies for educating children and inspiring them as learners? How do you create an engaging, equitable learning environment? If you have never reflected on these questions, now would be a good time. Okay, so I would say, after reading the answer, I definitely was asked things like, what is your teaching philosophy, or something like that. Tell me how you guys would answer that one. Sorry for all the ads. When it comes to teaching interview, there's no way to be prepared for any and all possible questions, but these are commonly asked ones and will definitely give you a leg up. Good luck, and may the odds be in your favor. So anyways, you could go to the board teachers article, which I will link, and then you can click on the one about the books. Anyways, thank you for all of you who came live, and thanks for all of you who will watch later. If you're watching later, give me your comments about what you think about all of these. Would you answer them differently? Have you gotten some of these questions on interviews? And you can also go watch my video vlog of me going on 20 interviews. It was for 17 different jobs with 20 interviews. So yes, there was some jobs I had more than one interview for the same job, in other words. So anyways, thanks a lot for watching, you guys, and those who came live. Bye. 再见.